Welcome back to the NYRA podcast. I'm Rimon-Hadassah, Vice President of NYRA. I'm here with some friends, if you all want to introduce yourselves.
Hi, I am Annie Friday. I am a former conventional school educator, and I have since become an unschooling parent and a self-directed educator, founding a micro school. And I am also the editor of Tipping Points magazine, an online magazine for the Alliance for Self-Directed Education. We put out articles, stories, art expressions from and for those who are living an unschooling life or a life that is self-directed and has decentralized school.
Hi, I'm Susan. I've been volunteering at NYRA for a year and a half and have been on a number of these podcasts. Both my kids did their entire education in a self-directed way, both at a self-directed school and unschooling. And I, for a while, facilitated a self-directed group called Flying Squads, which is how I met Annie.
Hi, I'm Imogen. I think I was on like two of these before. I went to a Sudbury school from 5 to 12 and then transitioned into unschooling. And I was also part of the flying squad Susan runs. She's my mom.
I'm excited to talk about this because in my kind of primary and secondary education, I did not participate in anything that I would be considered self-directed education. I went to public school, but I wish I was. I was in like middle and high school. I became like aware of Sudbury schooling in particular, and very much wanted to get out of schooling. And I did get out in my own way by doing early college.
Yeah, I agree. I didn't know anything about it, and I kind of fell backwards into it, to be honest. And I think that's a really typical story of a lot of people who end up unschooling. It comes from a variety of reasons, but a lot of people end up kind of doing it out of need or lack of other option. And so it's been interesting, and it's been really cool to become an unschooler myself, even though I'm a grown up and like wouldn't be in school in this time of my life necessarily. But I think there is an attitude and a lifestyle and a philosophy that comes with it that a lot of people who don't know a lot about it often don't get curious about. It's more than just like a choice of where to go to school.
Yeah, it reminds me of because my early college, Simon's Rock. There was a speech that our provost gave last year where he described himself as a late onset rocker. That he was not able to attend the school when he was because he wasn't aware of it properly. But becoming involved in it as an educator made him part of the community in that capacity, which I think it's really important for any kind of alternative education model, is having people who are like have a like identity and investment in it while not being necessarily students themselves.
Yeah, it's really, I feel the same way that even though I'm an adult, I'm a lifelong learner. And really, all of us, once you're not in that schooling process, you learn, well, if you want to know something, you figure something out and learn about it. And that's really the answer to a lot of the questions about like, well, how are young people going to learn if they're not in a conventional school? Well, the same way people of any age are going to learn. But it really does open up this whole world, like Annie was saying, that I didn't know about before on like, because of having grown up going to school, that was the thought, like, okay, there's a way to do things and a way to learn about things. So then you go through what is called deschooling and really seeing that if you want to learn, there's many ways to do it, and really that there's many ways to live, and we start to see how influenced everything in our culture is by school, and maybe we don't really need to do it this way, which ends up tying back in with youth rights, because then you start to see, oh, aren't we all here to learn, and or not just learn, but how are we all going to live together? Like the bigger questions start opening up once you're outside of thinking about life being about school, and then what is school leading to.
This kind of leads into a thing that I was thinking about asking about, which is like, what is kind of the pitch to somebody who has the like, well, how are the kids learning question, or the like, oh, but what if they'd never learned to read type thing? Because that is the big concern that I keep hearing about.
Well, to me, it's just kind of from personal experience. I mean, when you kind of just know people who've done it this way, you know that most of them learn to read. Just also, I'm not really convinced you learn to read in public school, given the fact that like everyone's freaking out that Gen Alpha can't read. So
I think when you get really into it, unschooling and self-directed education, and you do it with a liberatory lens, and I know not everybody who's unschooling has a liberatory lens, but I think there are people and organizations out there, and the version of self-directed education and unschooling that I subscribe to is the one that really connects you in a deeper way to your community. It's not an individualist approach, really. It's a community-based approach. And it actually, like, you start getting into some radical practices, right? That are things that, like, in theory aren't radical, and people can agree that, like, yeah, youth should have rights, right? But then, like, when it comes to practice is when you see, like, how people totally abuse youth rights. From a liberatory standpoint, like, why is it my business to control what my kids learn? And that sounds so radical, right? But like, why is it? And I'm going to be here to support their learning and to ensure that they're learning. But we're humans. We're always learning. Like, how could you not learn by being alive, right? Like, and it's more just an honoring of like their humanity, and making sure when we impose our priorities on kids, we don't know what else they're losing, right? Like, sometimes people push early reading. I'm an early childhood educator, have been for about half of my career. And when people are pushing their 3-year-olds to read, and then they become so much more reliant on visual life rather than auditory life, or, you know, other parts of them shift because of that. And you just kind of, it's a really beautiful way to be with kids, is by letting them tell you what's important to them and what they need to learn about. And life includes math, it includes reading. And if they want to be part of the community and like woven into it, right? Like, those are tools of the culture that they will need to learn at some time to be part of that culture, right? So they will. And I'm not saying like on their own, I'm not saying that people can't support them in that learning, that sometimes you need direct instruction, just like as an adult learning, sometimes I prefer direct instruction on some things. It's not a lack of education, but I think we've come to over-equate schooling with education. And, you know, like the Alliance for Self-Directed Education, like their whole thing is learning education is derived from all of your self-chosen activities that you go through life doing. And so by engaging in that you collect an education. What school brings is more the hierarchy, the labels, the, you know, so much compliance-based thinking, you know, is really what school is about. It's not actually about education and critical thinking. Yeah.
I mean, I kind of learned to read pretty late by most people's standards. I guess how I learned to read was mainly through anime subtitles and also YouTube comments. I realized I only really learned it when there was a reason to learn it beyond shame. Because I felt like a lot of shame, because like, I don't know, the thing about like school is that's so ingrained in our culture. So I think like I didn't grow up with the expectation that I was going to learn how to read early, but I still kind of had that ingrained. shame did not actually motivate me to do it. It was when it was something that I like actually wanted to do that was connected to things I enjoy, like YouTube and anime. We have this idea that like learning shouldn't be fun. And I think like I don't know, honestly the only times I learn things is when I'm really like enjoying it.
Yeah, and like Imogen was saying, when you're around a community of people that are unschoolers or self-directed learners, then you hear all of these great stories. Like you're like, oh, like it happened for this person, and like everyone has a really individual story rather than like, well, we all learned in first grade in this very specific way. And it's fascinating, and I never wanted to like remove that from my kids' experience. Like they both learned in very different ways. But I think there is no way, whether you're a parent or whether you're a young person who doesn't know how to read yet, that before it happens, you don't know it's going to happen. There can be this fear, like, well, what if, what if about the future, and then like it's like anything you're going to do in the future. It can create a lot of anxiety because it hasn't happened yet, and there isn't like some kind of 100% guarantee. And then after it happens, you're like, oh, what was I so worried about? It all happened. And you try to explain that to people that aren't at that point yet, like, oh no, it'll definitely happen, don't worry. But there's just really no way to not worry about it a little. That's just part of it. And so it can seem like taking the tried and true path that, because most people do it this way, if you go to conventional school and somehow you don't learn to read, you don't learn to read until later, it's not the school's fault. You're like, oh yeah, there was a special program happening or whatever. And like, it feels like eventually the school is going to take credit for however you learn to read, but that's not necessarily true. It just feels less risky because that's what everyone is doing.
I learned to read before. I was a very early reader because I'm the youngest child. My older siblings were big readers, and so like I got all of my interests from them. So in order to be part of this community of my siblings, I had to learn how to read early to engage with their interests. But it meant that school didn't help me any in like becoming a reader. I was already there. I think there's so much. This comes up a lot with self-directed education of so much anxiety in mainstream education around like whether kids are learning things on time, whether they're like ahead or behind, and like that. Every time that this comes up, I'm like, according to who said they need to learn this thing now?
Yeah, and these timelines are so deeply ingrained that, like Imogen mentioned, like you can never go to school, but you're very well aware of when you were supposed to learn how to read, or and whether it's the original question, like whether it's other people saying, what about math? What about reading? Or directly to the kids, right? Like my kids have that experience where like neighbor kids who go to school will be like, we'll do this math problem. And it's like, ugh, so annoying because it's not like, that's not the point. And we're not trying to stay on the timeline. But also like I just moved states, and my child was in one grade in one state, and we moved, and now they like, oh, he has to be in, and so like the timelines are arbitrary, people. Like, go to a different country and they're learning division at this age, not this age, whatever. Like we think we know because of what we know right here and now, and that's such a short-sighted view. And like you said, there's so much. The timeline of school expectations immediately create so much shame and so much pressure, and in both ways. Like you were an early reader because you wanted it and because you needed it, and you were self-motivated to get there, right? But people would judge that, right? And also a late reader, people would judge that for other reasons. And then just the shame, the amount of stuff we do based on shame through school, and finding that intrinsic motivation and intrinsic just even like desire, like what makes me happy, what interests me, has been my biggest thing as an adult now, deschooling and learning how to unschool. Is like, what are my drivers when I'm not motivated by extrinsic rewards? Because that's what we mostly grew up in with school. And teachers will defend it and say, but I wouldn't come to my job if I didn't get paid. Okay, but there are lots of things we do in life without a reward, right? Like when you have to go to the post office. Who loves going to the post office? Like you don't get paid to do it.
My mom loves going to the post office.
Yes, they love it. But yeah, so you know what I mean? Like so then some kids leave school with only that idea of I can do something for an extrinsic motivating factor, but if I want to do something that feels like work but isn't work, it's a lot harder because I don't have that. I do think it's like a level of trust because again, you're recognizing young people as fully human and fully capable, and they're fully capable to know what they need to know right then and there in that moment. And they, you know, as a parent or a person like facilitating their learning in some community space, maybe, you are aware of their humanity in a way that also honors letting them know what they might not know they need to know, right? Like, so it's not just leaving them to themselves. Like, we're here to still support them.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big thing, maybe that we run into. Like, if you hear about homeschooling or unschooling and you don't know too much about it, there's a lot of negative stuff out there that really equates it with neglect or additional control, which is kind of just the opposite of everything that Annie was just talking about and that we've been talking about. But it can be used that way, so it gets really complicated to kind of separate that out on, you know, what about in families that really want to keep their kids out of school to control them more, or there is neglect going on, or it is to prevent the kids from learning certain things in order to, you know, for religious reasons or whatever it is. And that's not, I don't know how common it is, but that is not the main thing homeschooling or unschooling self-directed education is about or can be about, but it is for some people. So it gets very, in people's minds, it can seem like a negative thing or like something that's not respectful of youth rights, when it really can be just the opposite, where you're honoring what a young person wants to do for themselves. So,
well, and just to kind of jump in on that point, a lot of times we hide other things in schools, right? Like the system of schooling is also like the child abuse prevention. You know, like, so when people say, like, if you take away schools, you take, you know, like some kids only eat when they come to school. Okay, but that seems like it's not a school problem. That's a society problem that can be addressed in other ways, right? And should be addressed in other ways. It's like, why is school the only place that you're going to detect child abuse? Like, why don't we have other structures in place to protect children? Like, right? Like, it's just this catch-all. And I think that is hard. Like, just to mention, like Susan brought up the critics, like when people are critical without being curious, it's really hard. And it's often well-intentioned, often people related to education who are like, but we do all this stuff. And also schools shouldn't be a catch-all. And that's why they're all like, most schools are strained with resources and don't have enough social workers and the wraparound services, because that wasn't what school was made to be. School was made to be this factory style of learning and leave it at that. And now we're trying to make it all of these other things. And is that fair to kids? And is it supporting kids?
I mean, I also saw this in, like, even the slight, like, difference from the norm that was early college. We had a lot of students who were there, like, after leaving, like, the troubled teen industry. And that the early college became, like, their next step after that. And then blaming the model of early college for the fact that their needs weren't being met. And, like, this seems less about a problem of pedagogy and more of a problem of society has neglected your needs. We put so much on school as a child's entire world. And I experienced that a lot growing up, of like, I really didn't have many other, like, outlets for anything other than being at school. And that wasn't good for me.
Yeah, so it's really a captive audience there, and that's the other thing people bring up. Well, what about socialization? And if you look for it, you can definitely find other places to meet other schoolers and stuff like that. It's out there, but it's true. Most young people are going to be in school, and so you can feel kind of left out or something, not being a part of like what most people are doing. So along with all of these other things, why isn't there more effort to like create community that could include all ages, or more ways to provide all of the things that kids need, rather than be like, well, they're already in school, so we'll just do it there.
Yeah, and I think there are places that are group spaces for young people to commune together, and yes, there's learning because there's always learning, but it's and so it may be considered a designated learning space. It looks very much like a school would, but it is self-directed, and so these are places where you can go. Imogen mentioned Sudbury schools are agile learning centers. There are independent self-directed education centers. Some are small home-based programs, some are center-based programs, some are big institutions that look just like schools. They all run a little bit differently. Most have a lot in common. I mean, if you're really seeing a space that has youth either driving it, managing it, like Sudbury schools, the youth run the school, in theory, at least. In practice, in a lot of them, I know. But like you see it in this, even though these places are very different, you see kids sitting in a hallway because they needed a sensory break and they don't need to be in a space with other people, right? Like you don't see classes the same way you see classes in school, because they're not always adult led and they're not always organized like that. But it's a place for group learning to happen with young people that respects their autonomy. And so I hesitate to be very anti-school, because schools are a really important place in our country, public schools especially. There are 50 million kids in public schools in our country. And we can't just I'm not saying remove the schools and let those kids figure it out and let those families figure it out, right? That's not it, but it's figuring out how we do that differently and how we do it and include respect and include youth rights and include, my kid was in kindergarten in public school, and we had a really sudden and tragic death in our family. So we missed a bunch of school, and he was a kindergartner. And then, his first year in public school, he got every cold that went around, had a ton of sick days. And this is in February of 2020. The irony of the date is important. We got a letter from the truancy office saying that if he missed any more school, they would have a home visit because he was considered truant with all of his absences. And it was maybe 7 total or something. And they say strive for less than 5. That was their motto. And they wanted kids there. If you were absent more than 10 days, it affected their funding or whatever. I don't know. But it was just so ironic because then a month later, weeks later, the schools all closed suddenly overnight. And I'm like, oh, so now you get to go. But it was just amazing because I'm like, he's a kindergartner. He's clearly learning. He's clearly been accounted for. And this is your response. I felt so punished by the people who had been walking me through these really difficult moments of life, right? They were supposed to be family to me. They were part of my community raising my kid. And the system doesn't have feelings though, right? The system sent me the letter. And this is something I've been really exploring lately in writing and stuff. Systems don't have feelings. They're not people. And we have to stay connected to the people. And systems really ignore kids in general. And so we have to really think about if schools are really meant to be places for kids, why do they start at the time that has been proven to be not a good start time for their brain, right? Why do we deny bathroom breaks and teach them to not listen to their bodies? We do all of these things that are known to be harmful to kids, but it's okay because it's school and it's just normalized. And so can you decentralize school if you are a family who needs school, public school needs that support system in your life, sure, like you can go there and need that support system and still decentralize it and still push back when you get the letter from the truancy office and go into that principal's office and say, this is ridiculous and you should have some say in this. And even though it's out of your hands, I'm still coming to you because this is something you should bring to the next person up the line, because schools are run like corporations now. And I did, right? Like we have to be comfortable pushing back and not be afraid of the systems if you are somebody who's still in the system.
It's both. I know. I mean, as far from a youth rights perspective, there's many teenagers, kids that really want to go to school, and great. That should be their choice, even if parents have some fear about what might be happening at the school. And then on the other hand, like for example, there's another NYRA member. High school wasn't quite working out, got his GED, and moved on to doing other things. So it's just knowing what options are out there. Again, if you know you have options besides school, then you're going to feel more powerful in school as well if you're staying. So, back to what Annie was saying about the different options that are out there. I know my kids went to the Clearwater School, a little bit north of Seattle, which is Sudbury School, and then for homeschooling, there's a lot of options that there are community centers which offer classes for the community, and in some cases, homeschoolers have designated a certain day where there's going to be classes for homeschoolers on that day, and then also meet at that place to play on the playground, and it's just a general meeting place. So once you really open up the options, there's all kinds of things you can do, and then the system does start to seem very narrow, because it's interesting. There's so much worry about the absences now. Like since pandemic, there's an epidemic of school absence, and then when I looked into chronic absenteeism, something like that, when I looked into how much that was, this is like 2 days a month is considered chronic absenteeism, and that seems like, well, I don't know, if you're sick a couple times and then maybe you want to do something with your family, there's a vacant. It just seems really reasonable to me. If school is so unadaptable that missing a few days here and there to do something worthwhile is going to ruin your entire education, ruin it for everybody, there's just really something questionable about that. So,
yeah. I think the pandemic, especially for like students who were in like middle and high school when the pandemic hit, this kind of like collective like noticing that we don't need to be there. Because I was in 10th grade when that happened. I went home in March 2020, and then that fall I started at Simon's Rock for undergrad. So. Which I had already been planning to do. Like, I kind of had this hope when it happened that this would be, like, an inciting incident of, like, collective bargaining of, like, especially high schoolers of, like, okay, because I had been, like, around them. This is a big sticking point for me in high school of, like, being aware that we don't need to be here doing this. It was maddening. And I was like, maybe this will be the thing that makes them realize that, like, this is what we're doing in these classes isn't necessarily the best way to learn, and it isn't even necessarily learning. And something like it did happen of students missing classes more because they realized they didn't have a reason to go. It wasn't quite as collective as I had hoped, but
yeah, I know we've tied learning so much with school that, like, people kind of think that's just what learning is. Like, I was thinking, like, I think I've learned the most from just watching, like, YouTube, and it's like, why is going to a class and just sitting down listening to, like, a lecture inherently better than me watching a video essay on YouTube? They're both kind of the same thing, and yet one is considered helpful and one is considered, like, a waste of time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, what comes to mind is just really the control element. I think if you went to history class at the appointed time and they showed you a video essay, about history, but even better if it's a little bit boring and talking down to you a bit, then that's educational. But if you just watch the same video essay at home when you want to, now you're wasting time, or, so,
Yeah. And there's the, like, element there that is of control that is not being emphasized in classes, which is, like, the reason why the video essay that you find on YouTube might not be, like, considered as educational as the one you learn in school is that it hasn't been, like, approved by some body that would, like, determine whether it's credible or not. And instead of teaching the students the skills to learn whether a video essay might be credible or not, or even, like, emphasizing that might be something to be mindful of, the message is, well, if you learn it in school, it's correct. And if you learn it outside school, it's wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I think that just comes from, like, really, I think deciding, like, what's misinformation just kind of comes from life experience, and I think you have to, like, be exposed to opposing information to decide what you think is correct. A lot of adults, like, think they're correct, and, it's not like everything you learn in school is automatically correct. And this is something that kind of annoys me, is that there are some people who are like, I want the young to have, like, critical thinking skills, so it's like teach a class about that. And I'm like, that's not what critical thinking is.
It is a skill that is built that you kind of have to grow from the inside. And that's absolutely, like, I mean, this is the thing I see in kind of my online spaces a lot, is the, like, in response to people saying, like, why didn't they teach us this interesting thing in class? And it's like, oh, they did, you just weren't paying attention, or, like, and I'm like, I think you're trying, you're missing the mark here. You've forgotten that, like, school sucks. Like, legitimately, like, you can put it in more, like, erudite or nuanced ways than that, but, like, to the student who is experiencing school, that is the way it's experienced, is that it sucks. And until that changes, you can, like, feel superior for being a teacher's pet all you want. That's not going to change what your classmates learned.
Yeah, well, and you mentioned that, like, the gatekeeping of the curriculum, right? Like, that's a whole thing. And the textbook industry is a $115 billion market, and who's writing those, right? Like, it's not a wide range of people. There's only a few major publishers who have been in the game forever and read the history and read the whiteness and the racism, and, like, it's just you can have the best teachers in the world who get creative with that as much as they can, but it's still a really set curriculum in most places, and like, and very, very one-sided, like you said. Like, you don't get to necessarily really see, how much history was learned by those of us in our middle age who it's like, wait, oh, what? I'm learning now as an adult. Like, what? I don't know. It's just wild to think that you are learning that much more in school. I don't know. And it's hard. And it's hard because, like I said earlier, like, there are a lot of well-intentioned people, right? Like, most educators, most conventional school teachers are very well-intentioned people. Most of them are terribly paid and not respected, like, not like I already said earlier, like, there's so many things on their plate. Like, I'm not trying to badmouth teachers, but it's just, like, it's amazing to work with kids in a way where you're there and present with them and part of what they're learning, but not the authority on it. Like, it's such a really cool experience, and having seen it and having been part of it now, like, many times over, it's just like, why would I ever go back to a place where I think I know everything and they're going to learn everything from me? And it's so unhuman. Like, it's just so unhuman. It's like, to really honor the humanity of kids is to realize they have a lot to teach us, and maybe their freshness is what we need more than my experience, right? Like, in so many ways right now, I want to hear where we're going with this world from the young people. Like, we're good. I've heard enough from my age and older. Like, we've done our job. We've screwed it up enough. Let's see where there's some fresh ideas. And yeah, it's just recognizing that humanity of like, it comes from everywhere.
But really, I think that's probably our best chance, is that collaboration between younger people and people with more experience. And I think that's really the way humans are meant to live. I think we talked about this with Amorous a bit. This was, I think, episode 14 of our NYRA podcast with Amorous, a little bit about like, well, okay, so the way we do it now with school, it really comes from a pretty terrible history of colonialism, and you're trying to create factory workers. It's not anything about this is really what's best for people in learning. And once you realize like we don't have to do it this way, it can change. It could change like more dramatically and more quickly, I think, than people realize, if people really felt like they wanted that. Because I think, like I was saying, the teachers really do, most of them really care about kids, and people are people, but it's just the system is this certain way, but we don't have to adhere. And it's easier to change than most systems would be, because as an individual family, there's all kinds of ways to like not participate in school. I mean, it's gonna, depending on your situation, it could be pretty tricky, but it's possible for many people. So it's a way you actually can make a big change, and a lot of our listeners are youth in high school or something. It is possible once you start exploring the possibilities. There's a variety of possibilities out there. So
I mentioned John, the provost of Simon's Rock, earlier, and I think there's a completely like unexplored space for this in higher education as well, that like it is unheard of in a lot of higher education spaces that the professor might learn something from their students. There's such like a hierarchy of expertise in higher education that I was lucky to do undergrad in an environment that didn't enforce that. That John wrote something that I keep coming back to about how like every class he enters, his goal as an educator is to hear something from his students that he's never heard before about the material that they're talking about. And then that was part of a wider piece about like how to structure a program to encourage that. It was really encouraging to read. I guess my point here is like I really hope we don't lose sight of this when it comes to higher education, that there's so much like deeply entrenched, I think, deprogramming that needs to happen from a lot of educators in that space who aren't really like trained primarily as educators, who are like trained mostly in terms of how they relate to this institution in enforcing a hierarchy.
And once you kind of realize that hierarchy doesn't have to be there, there really is a great place to learn, maybe even in a very traditional sort of class setting, but like learning from someone who's an expert on something, and like gathering in a group to do that can be an amazing way to learn. So like we never need to get rid of that. But when you've been in a setting where the people who are showing up to that really want to learn what the subject matter is about and aren't just like captive in like class after class, when they want to be doing something else, there's just many ways to learn it. It can be from a book and, from a teacher. Those can be great ways to learn. So for people who want to do that, like we were just talking, like whether it's a video essay or whether we were just talking before we started the podcast about going to fan conventions, which Imogen and I do all the time. And that is often to like hear from someone who really knows what they're talking about and just sit and listen. And that can be wonderful. So that doesn't have to be a negative thing. Or as Annie was talking about, there's all these school buildings and there's teachers there who want to offer something. And there's definitely different ways we could structure this. And in higher education too, there's maybe some flexibility there to just bring in some more humane ways of doing things. So.
Yeah. And Ramon, you mentioned like the hope of the pandemic, and I was in the process of opening a self-directed education center when the pandemic hit. We were planning to open the next school year, and it was like, we have the solution. Like, we could have all these like small communities if we just had all these little micro schools that just let kids be kids. And like, we know, like, we're seeing the results of what's happening when kids are left to play and go outside. And everyone's like, I know everything wasn't hunky dory in the pandemic, and I'm definitely not trying to say like it was very traumatizing for many people for many reasons also, but like, it really was like, oh, it's within reach to create this change when there's already such a dramatic shift that we've never experienced before, and recenter and like actually live the values we claim to have as, you know, as a group society. Like, we claim to honor children. Let's do it. We claim to honor education. Let's talk about what education really is. Like, let's let them explore and learn what they want to learn. Yeah, so it was hard. It was hard to see that, like, as soon as memories fade, like, it's back to normal. And right now, with a lot of conversations around school vouchers and ESAs and all the different ways to say, you know, government money for private schools, it's really hard. And it's hard to talk. For me, it's become harder to talk about a little bit unschooling, because it kind of is becoming like you're a bad liberal if you support anything other than public school. And it's a tricky conversation to navigate when I say, oh, we don't go to school. And people are like, oh, you're better than school or whatever. You know, all of a sudden assumptions are made. It's complicated, right? Like, so some vouchers now are being used for people who aren't being served well by public schools to find somewhere where they will be served, right? Like, we have colleagues and connections in North Carolina who have an Agile Learning Center, and they are able to take vouchers, and they have kids who really need that space and didn't thrive in a public school setting or a conventional school setting, even a private school. And so they're able to access it only because of this. And that program is able to then actually pay their facilitators, because they're getting, you know, otherwise most of these SDE centers open and close quickly or charge a lot of money for tuition to stay around. We might need to get a little bit more nuance in how we solve this problem and not just put it again back on the shoulders of schools. Public schools will solve everything. We need the money though. We also need to vision what's next. Like, in Chicago, we have an AI school opening where they go to school for 2 hours with AI something, I don't know. And then the rest of the time is free time. And I'm so curious to get in there and learn more, because if it is fully self-directed the rest of the day, like, cool. I think we are like at a shifting point, and more families, whether it's because of children with neurodiversities that aren't being served well in school. That's a common theme among unschoolers and why they leave. Liberation practices, right? Like, if you're seeing your kids be oppressed by a system every day and you want to leave that or never go to it, that's another reason people come to this. There's all kinds of reasons to come to life without school, but it's happening in greater numbers than ever before. And I think it's just because we're like, oh yeah, we don't need this. Like, we are okay without this, and kind of creating that mutual aid network of what we need from others in our community and other families who unschool, and finding experts to apprentice from, you know, other ways to learn, and also stay human and respect yourself, because there's a lot of self-respect lost in schools, and not for every kid, but for enough kids that it should matter more than it does.
Yeah, I definitely see that happening with this, like, somehow over the years, more and more being in support of teachers and in support of public school is something like you must do, or you're what are you, some far right Christian religious, and no, where I think it, you know, some years ago it used to be more acceptable to just say, just like you were saying earlier, Rimon, like, you know, school sucks, like, let's face it, you know, I mean, it's kind of, we're not really sure how to get out of it, but it's not a very great place. Now I find that somehow less acceptable to talk about. And that's kind of too bad that we've become a little bit more like one-dimensional in like which possibilities you can explore depending on sort of like your general worldview politically. So yeah.
Yeah. And
when really, I think all of us should be open to all the possibilities. So, yeah.
Also happening with, I mean, horrific attacks on higher education from the right, as well as that it gets that stance in progressive spaces of this reaction of like believing that higher education institutions, like if you don't say that they're always good all the time, that you are aligning with those forces or doing their work for them. And I don't like but when it's like the institutions that are like actually experiencing the most tangible harm from this push against higher education are like small liberal arts universities, like the ones who are actually doing the work to like do this in a more liberatory way are the ones that are also shutting down. Like a big state university is not going to shut down because of pressure from the right, especially if they're going to rewrite their curriculum exactly how the president wants them to, which is what's happening instead.
Yeah, like Susan said, I think we need to collectively be more curious and ask more questions and not be so quick to judge what school, like if we have to call it school, still fine. What does it look like? Like how does it actually honor kids and their development and their needs? And when I was in the process of opening my self-directed space, it was when my son was in kindergarten and I wasn't opening it for him. He was happy in his public school setting. But I was doing volunteer work for the public school, and the school's mission at the time was something like the school district. The overarching mission was something like creating scholars, probably is the word they use, who will be able to, and it was like, critical thinking, like buzzword things. And the last one was self-direct, whatever, something. And they used the word self-direct or self-directed. And I was just like, whoa. And I just like jumped back and was like, wow, they think they're helping kids self-direct? Like, I don't, like, are they in their schools? Like, I just was like, I'm there every day and I see these kids micromanaged and punished and punished and punished. And like, and there's nothing self-directed about it. They can't even take themselves to the bathroom when they have to go. Like, what do you think self-directed means? Like, it just was like when I was like, this is like, I gave up all hope in education at that point. And like, it's all words, it's all smoke and mirrors. Like, what are we actually doing? How are we actually honoring our kids and raising them in ways that like supports them and gives them autonomy?
Something I've noticed is most people really do view young people as future adults. So people kind of think they can't direct their own lives now because we'll force them to learn how to direct their lives, and somehow that'll mean they can when they're older. And that's just how most people think of it, instead of, if you really want them to learn how to direct their own lives, they should like just start doing that.
Reminded me, my middle school's really hard when motto was excellence whatever it takes. Which is dystopia.
Oh no. That's pretty ominous, yeah.
If you have to.
Structures do equate doing what you're told with intelligence. That is actually the skill being measured by a lot of, grades.
And there is a little bit of push, right, in the higher education world. I'm working with a professor right now who has gone to an ungrading system, and they were saying just how, like, offended some colleagues are by it and stuff. And it was just interesting to learn about and hear about and be like, oh, like, yeah, weird.
It's crazy to be in classes that are like taught by like Marxists and communists who are like always telling us about liberation ideas, and then they'll like, oh right, but you unilaterally have control over what my numerical score is for this class, and you haven't re-examined that at all.
It is really ironic like that. Or sometimes if you're learning about history and you're learning about all of these like very accomplished people in the past, and it's like, oh, well, the Wright brothers, they only had an 8th grade education, and as though, or whatever it is, it's kind of as though, so clearly they were unschoolers. After the 8th grade, they just experimented with, flying. That was their passion, and look what they did. And their sister went to college and did their finances and like really made it happen as well. But in any case,
I didn't know that.
As though this is something that only could have happened for people, long ago and far away, like Alexander Hamilton or whoever it is that like, oh, that just sort of
Albert
learned on their
Einstein.
own.
Like the system like reintegrates these as like exceptions that prove the rule, that like, oh, these people could do this because they were so exceptional and not because the system was failing them. If someone who's public school educated and like succeeded in public education does well, it's because public education is good, or that schooling is good. And if somebody who was not served by that system does well, it's because they're just too smart for it. Which is a thing I experienced a lot in like the early college setting, of like the narrative being that these students are so like successful or able to be independent because they're exceptional and not because the system is better for them.
When we say products of public school, like that's such a weird way to dehumanize someone. Like,
yeah, and it really says like who's to say what people are doing? There's these really exceptional people, but really like every human has something amazing that they're offering. If you're thinking a little bit more in a community collaborative kind of way, we need everybody. So when you set these certain examples, like for a while, I was seeing different schools advertised as like, if you want your kids to be the next Steve Jobs, and I'm kind of like, that's kind of the last thing I really want for my kids. I use Steve Jobs products every day. There's just so many ways, that we can measure like what is a worthwhile human being, and really that everyone's a worthwhile human being. It's just a matter of getting curious about what different people are offering and how we can support everybody in contributing what they're going to contribute.
Yeah. My kid could be Steve Jobs, but could my kid be happy and fulfilled?
And so we've introduced the topic. There's really like so much we could talk about, and like different guests we could invite and different things we could do. So
thank you for listening to the NYRA podcast. Goodbye.
Bye.